Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Chief Superintendent of the World, Mr. John Bown. Are you there, John?
Yes, I'm here. You do bigging up of people, don't you, really?
Well, I like, one has to, you know. Now listen, I'm going to try and slip into your accent because when I came up to see you, I have to say, it took us around about 2 days to acclimatise. And we were only there for 1 day, so we didn't understand a word you were saying. Nothing. For around about a day and a half. And your brother, as for your brother, oh my, thee and thou, he were talking like that, weren't you, the whole time?
Yeah, nobody can understand him, yeah.
No, it's true. He's old Derbyshire, isn't he?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
John, tell us where you are, exactly where you are at the moment.
Well, I'm sitting in our living room in a 500-year-old farmhouse in the hills of Derbyshire, overlooking the Amber Valley. And this house is 500 years old, but I'm not. We've lived here for about 28 years, and it's a lovely place to be, as you know, because you've stayed here with us.
We have indeed, and what a pleasure it was, Margaret and you cooking up a storm, the most wonderful roast dinner. You are the most hospitable couple, as many from this community attest. You've got a wonderful family. Part of your family live there, and I know that actually when we came up, I just have to say that it was the most splendid time, wasn't it, Sue?
It was wonderful.
One of those wonderful times that we won't forget, and I think we're coming up to stay with you again when we're coming up
just before Sheffield.
Before Sheffield.
Yeah.
You are indeed, and you're delightful guests, so you're very welcome.
Oh,
great, thank you. You're very kind. Anyway, John, you know I had you on not so that I could pat you on the back and tell you you're very good for a 500-year-old man, but I got you on for a number of reasons. I think because you're an interesting person. I love people with stories, John, and I'm convinced that you press anybody a little bit, that out comes a wonderful story. And you have so many stories to tell. Between you and your brother, I think there's nothing stopping you, is there?
No, there isn't.
Tell us a little bit about where you were born and what happened and how it led to you becoming. What was your final position before you retired?
I was a superintendent. I was head of training for the Derbyshire Police.
My goodness, that's rather special position that was. For how many years did you do that?
Well, I only did that for about 18 months at the end. We were in a bit of a mess. The Derbyshire Police were in a bit of a mess. The Home Office had not issued a certificate of effectiveness for a number of years. And in my first week as head of training, having been away from the force at the police college, Sir Geoffrey Deere came, the HMI, and he said to me, at one time, the police training in Derbyshire was second to none. Now it's the bottom of the heap. Why is that? Well, it was the second day of my appointment. I was inclined to say to him, well, it's not my fault, is it? But they wouldn't have accepted that. So I said something about it being underfunded and we'd do our best to put it right. And so I had 18 months of trying to address those difficulties, which we'd got then a very good chief constable who was modernising. We did lots of things about helping decision making to be made at the right level and so on. It's too long a story for me to tell you in a short interview, but it is in the book.
It's in the book. It's going to be excellent. And now, what led you to the police? Because you come from a very humble background. Talking about listening to you and your brother, it was a very tough.
Well, let me paint a picture of what life was like at home. We farmed 30 acres of farmland in the hills of Derbyshire, which is not much, and it wasn't much of a living. This is going back until I left home at the age of 19. At our house, we had no electricity. We had no laid-on water supply. We carried water from a trough in the field for ourselves and for the animals. And we had an earth toilet that was about a 250-yard walk and next door to the pigsty. So at least if there was a bad smell, we could blame the pigs, It was very difficult keeping the candle in when you walked from the door there to the toilet. The other thing about it was a two-seater, this earth toilet. So if you could have company whilst you were there. Never tried it out, actually, but, you could have sat there holding hands and singing a romantic song about what was passing.
I knew I'd get you on, and I knew toilets would become involved somewhere.
Yeah, well, it does not. It's something that happens. Even the Queen, and we've been talking about her. Even she has to do that. So
Yeah, so don't start.
sometimes,
This is not the time to
yeah,
talk about. Don't break my long-held imagination that the Queen never did that kind of thing.
no,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Now, I mean, John, just a side issue. But what's your feeling about all this with the Queen now and the police major operation up in London now? I mean, how did you feel when she passed?
Well, it was a shock, wasn't it? I mean, we know she was not going to live forever, but when she was in harness only a few days, 48 hours before she died, and she was appointing the new prime minister,
Yeah.
you didn't expect that she would die so suddenly, although we all knew that at some stage it would happen. Uh, she's been quite a remarkable lady, hasn't she, to be honest
Yeah.
with you? I mean, I was thinking about what it is about her, and there were two words. I come from a Methodist background, so you have different words. You have 3-point sermons and so on. So I came up with two words beginning with S and two words beginning with F. So service and stability is what the Queen has been to this nation. She's been a servant.
Yes.
Although she's got so much power in a way, theoretical power, yet she has been a servant to us, a servant to this nation and to the Commonwealth and indeed to the world. And the stability that she's provided, when you think that she's seen, is it 15 presidents of the
15,
United States of
yeah.
America and all the prime ministers, she has
13 of them, John.
Yeah.
13 of them in the last 3 months.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well, it seems that way. And I'm not so sure that the standard of prime minister improves over the years.
I think not.
Let's not go there. But
No.
the other two words are faith and family, because it's been very clear all the time that what informs what the Queen does
Yes.
is a strong faith in Christ and a commitment to a family. And, families have good times and bad times, and her family has had good times and bad times, but she's seen them through. She has been, in every way, a remarkable lady, the likes of which I don't think we'll ever see again. That's not to say I have no confidence in King Charles. He seems to have laid it down that he will follow the example of his mother, and I pray that that will actually be the case, and we'll see continuing stability. But Justin Welby was being interviewed this evening about what was going to happen at the funeral. And he was expressing how there are two things happening. There's the national mourning and there's all the pomp and ceremony. But at the same time, there's a family who've lost a dear one and a loved one. And how they can harmonize that was what he was saying is the real challenge. And then he prayed there and then that the family would be comforted in their grieving, as well as there being able to be this national outpouring of grief and this ability to celebrate this wonderful life of our monarch.
Yeah, I think that's a great reflection, John. Thank you for thinking about that. I'd kind of thrown it at you just before when we come together at 7 o'clock, and I just wanted because I think you've got great perspective. You've got a great intellectual life. You and Margaret, and I must mention Margaret here because I think Margaret has been like Suez for me. With you, how many years have you been married now?
Well, coming up to 60, really, in about 8
goodness.
time.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, she's really an essential part of my story. I became a Christian at the age of 15 on the 1st of December 1958. Margaret was already a very good friend, probably one of my best friends, actually. But I started to pray about life, and God led me, guided me, called me to be a policeman. So the book is called Called to Serve and Protect, because in essence, Christians are called to that, to be the salt and light. But as a policeman, that's what we were called, what we're called to do. And so that incident on the 1st of December 1958 has informed everything I've done since. In the same way that the Queen's faith informed the way she lived her life. That's not to say I've got it right all the time. I make a mess sometimes. We all do. We're sinners and we need God's salvation. So, if St. Paul can say, I who am the chief amongst sinners, and the good I would I do not, and the evil that I would not I do, then I'm like him. But, God has blessed my life. I've had a remarkable series of adventures in my life. And it's all because of that decision to follow Jesus in 1958.
And that was way back, I think that was a Billy Graham crusade, wasn't it?
No, it was a
Oh.
local evangelist
Right.
in the little Wesleyan Reform Union of Churches in the hills of Derbyshire, to be honest. No, I've had a lot
Right.
to do with Billy Graham because I've worked alongside him as a member of the Christian Police Association.
That's what
So
it was.
I've looked after him on the stage, at the Rye Conference Centre in Amsterdam, on Mission England at Villa Park, on Mission England at Sheffield at Bramhall Lane, where I became a witness to show that what had been alleged to have happened from Cliff Richard had not really happened. So I was a witness for him in that terrible allegation that was made against him, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Well, that's fairly recently.
Well, that was that. The allegation was about an incident in 1985.
Yes.
It was this where, the South Yorkshire Police announced that they were going to raid his house, and it was on television.
Yeah.
Subsequently, they've apologised for that and said he got it very wrong. But
Indeed.
somebody made allegations about him, and I was looking after the VIPs, so I was close to Cliff Richard for a lot of the time, and I was able to say that what had been alleged to have happened couldn't possibly have happened in the way that it was suggested. So
Goodness, you have had such an interesting life, haven't you?
That's only a part of it.
Well, let's go back a bit. Shall we just go back a bit? So there you are. You come from a very poor background where expectation and educational expectation is fairly low. Is it? Would you say, or not?
Well, my mother once said to me, "They'll find out, youth. Educational bit ruination at world."
And that's what I'm talking about, John. It's that nobody understands. Are you from France, Germany, or somewhere else? But they'll find it'll be the ruination of the world.
So I went to school at 15.
Yes.
And in my penultimate year, I've still got a report for that year somehow. It's escaped the incinerator, and it shows that I was in the top 6 in my class in every subject, but I had 45 absences. So I was away for 9 weeks because my mother said, "They's learnt all they're going to learn. They may as well go and help their relatives farming." So every time there was a job to do on a relative's farm, I had to go and do the job and stay away from school. But I was bright, and I managed to pass the exam as a 16-year-old to become a police cadet. And in a sense, the rest is history. And I now have a master's degree. I was a chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, etc., and led a remarkable life, really.
Did that surprise you, John? Was it a surprise to you when you went to collect your degree of masters and all the rest of it? Did you?
Yes, it was. And there's a little interesting thing about part of the motivation, to be honest. I was appointed to a job at one stage as taking charge of regional inspector training, and I'd been in a newly formed part of the force where I was doing a remarkable job, and suddenly I was moved into a training thing, and I weren't particularly pleased about it, and I only found out from somebody who was replacing me. So I went to see the bloke I was replacing, and he knew that I was replacing him, but the opening words was to me, he said, "The Home Office say that you must have a degree to do this job, and you don't have one. I don't know how you're going to cope." So I said, "Well, I came asking for advice, but I think I've got whatever advice I need. Goodbye." And, and so then I got the opportunity to study actually directly for a master's degree at Birmingham University, which I did, and I obtained it. By this time, this colleague was now a chief superintendent of the division, and I felt like going to him with my master's degree certificate and saying, "I don't know how you can do your job when you..." But he never did. But
you never did. No, because you're a godly man. Because you wanted to just go up and straight in the eye. I know that feeling. Yeah. It's funny, isn't it, when you achieve something which you think that you may.
Well,
not...
perhaps people have implied that you shouldn't have achieved.
Bring Sue in, will you, please?
She'll put me up the top.
Sorry, go on.
Yes, but that maybe you've achieved something that other people are sort of a bit sceptical about. It's sort of, you do want to sort of almost rub their noses in it, don't you, and say, "Look, I've done it. You didn't think I would, but I've done it."
Yeah, that's anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it was a long journey to get to get to that degree. I mean, by then I was already a senior police officer, and I was doing the studies between about 2 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the morning.
Well, that's dedication, John. That's really hard work.
Absolutely.
John, you the thing about an interview like this, as we found last week with Chris Wynn, you open a it's a kind of a Pandora's box, or it's a box of tricks actually, because out it comes, and so many stories. And when we were with you, it was so lovely to catch up on your life. One of the things that interests me about your life, you talk about becoming a Christian and instructed every major point in your life.
Yeah.
You said that or words to that effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think one of the times that you talked about, and it's worth sharing, is when you were abroad. You were abroad quite a lot.
Yeah. Well,
tell us about that. You were away from home quite a lot. No doubt Margaret was driven crazy, but
and you know that that puts pressure on your marriage, and it does. It's on your wife, who's got to look after everything in your absence. And there were some difficult times, but I wouldn't have missed it for anything. The first period was in Ethiopia. I was there from 1996 until 2000, and it's a matter of record that in a restaurant in Addis Ababa in April 1997, a hand grenade exploded about 8 inches from my right leg. Margaret was to my left, my colleague to my right, and it exploded between us, and we ought to be dead. But by the grace of God, as you can see, you're not talking to a ghost. I'm here. I happen to have a body full of shrapnel, but beyond that, I'm thankful that I survived.
What happened? What happened? Was it thrown in by?
Yeah, it was the separatist movement, the Oromia Liberation Front. We were dining in a restaurant, 4 of us around the table, one or two more people. It was early in the evening. I'd arranged this event to celebrate a successful conference that we'd held, and our wives had both arrived in the country, and I'd come across this beautiful Italian restaurant. So we were there waiting to be served. There was a bang, which I found out later was a Kalashnikov being fired at the guard outside. And then they came in. We didn't see them. They threw one to the other side of the restaurant where there was a table occupied, and one towards us. And the first thing I found out was that my colleague's wife said, "Oh God, it's a bomb." And I looked down, and a nice bright shiny hand grenade stopped to a standstill about 6 to 8 inches away from my legs.
Oh my goodness.
The smoke. Then the lights went out. I don't mean the electric lights. I mean my lights. Somehow it blew me unconscious. The next thing I remember was walking around and bleeding profusely, particularly between my legs. And knowing the soldiers that had limbs blown off and not known about it, I thought I'd better do a quick check. And it seemed as though everything was there, although not fully functioning at that time. I had 30-odd significant wounds, and it was said that I lost about 50% of my blood.
Goodness, John.
The person in the emergency department was convinced that night we would die, which we didn't, because God had deemed that we would survive, you know.
I mean, that's how did Margaret? I mean, there must have been major trauma for you both. In fact, all four of you in that.
There was. I mean, as a matter of fact, she saw it explode, but I obviously moved very quickly. Now the press got hold of the fact that we jumped on the hand grenade, so we were made out to be heroes when we got back to the UK. But the truth is, you know, I can only imagine from a reconstruction, because I'd got shrapnel underneath my right foot. So I must have moved very quickly towards my wife, the nearest thing to a soft target I could find. Well, she was looking and saw it explode, and my fairly large, substantial backside got directly between her face and the hand grenade. So it's a much better place for the shrapnel to be in my backside than in my wife's face. But she ended up with a piece of the marble from the floor stuck in her leg. And she, well, at one stage, I came round, I walked outside, I couldn't find Margaret, and I was shouting her name and she wasn't replying. And I started to think, oh Lord, I've arranged this trip out, and now my wife's died, and it's absolutely my fault. Why on earth did I invite people to this restaurant? And that's the sort of thing that happens in those occasions. But she'd not been knocked unconscious. she'd crawled under a table because she thought maybe there'd be some more hand grenades. She thought she was bleeding, and she took off her underskirt and fastened the tourniquet around her own leg.
Now, can I just stop you? Just stop you right there and say, that is Margaret.
Absolutely.
She's completely.
Margaret.
That is Margaret, the Margaret that I've only known for a
sensible,
short
practical. What shall I do next?
She is, isn't she? She's like you. That's exactly what you'd have done. You would have gone, right, what do I need to do? I need to do this, this, and this. I mean, she's quite a woman, actually, I have to say.
Yeah, at the moment, incidentally, she's not very well. We both had our booster jab, and it's upset her. So she's gone next door to our daughters to make sure that she didn't flake out whilst, you know.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, mate. I'm
No,
sorry.
I'll
If
give her
you
our
are
love.
watching, then big love to you, Margaret, and the family.
She'll be fine.
Because you're an extraordinary woman. Okay, so you survived this.
Yeah.
Let me. What was the journey of faith for you after that time? Was it plain sailing?
Well, yeah, is it plain? Faith's never plain sailing, is it? Because, you know, it's like one victory will help you another to win. You get temptations along the way, and some things go wrong and some things go well. But there was always a much deeper reality that if I was to die, I was going to be with the Lord. At one stage, I was convinced I was dying. I couldn't breathe properly. I was making a gurgling sound in my chest, and a number of people had been making that sound when I've been trying to help them at fatal accidents and so on. Yeah. And I said to Margaret, I'm dying. And I prayed, Lord, forgive my sin and receive my soul. And I expected to die. She just took hold of my hand. She told me afterwards that going through her mind was the words of a hymn, how sweet the name of Jesus sounds. And the believers hear it heals his sorrows, heals his wounds. And drives away his fears. And, you know, she couldn't actually remember our telephone number because of shock. And I wasn't in a position to ring anybody anyway because of my health. She managed to remember her sister's telephone number, and she rang her sister. And her sister had got contacts all over the world. And within moments, there were people all around the world praying for us. You know, people have bad experiences with something like that. We've never had any flashbacks. Two people in the week that we got home called independently to see us, prompted by God speaking to them to say, God said, come and pray with you that you never have any flashbacks. I don't have any dreams. I don't have any nightmares. The only possible thing I get is if there's a loud bang, I tend to jump a little bit. But that's all. And funnily enough, when we got back, my son-in-law, because this was all taking place when Chesterfield were having a good run in the FA Cup, and they ought to have beaten Middlesbrough at Manchester, but because of a bad decision by the ref, there was a replay. And so my son-in-law said it's only been arranged so that he can get back for the replay of his beloved Chesterfield. So I mentioned this in the press conference, and we were invited to the football match to be guests of Littlewoods, who were then the sponsors.
Oh, my goodness.
We sat in the posh part of Hillsborough. It was a bit of a struggle to get up the steps because I was still recovering, but people were exploding balloons all over the place, and I was going about 6 foot into the air every time a balloon exploded. And Chesterfield played very badly.
That's the result of that story then. So it didn't go well. Sue.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking, well, I'm not surprised that you've been asked to write a book because, John, you are just a fund of these amazing stories of things that have happened to you and experiences that both you and Margaret have had over the years. How did this book come about? Sorry, am I interrupting?
No, darling,
sorry. So, I mean, I'm fascinated to know how we've got from your jottings to actually a book.
Well, yeah. About 3 years ago, as is usual, reading my Bible in the middle of the night, and a lot of the members of the JV community will vouch for the fact that I'm often awake at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's one of the amazing things of this community is that you switch on and somebody's asking for prayer at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and within seconds there's 3 or 4 or 5 praying for them. So but one of these nights I was reading through the Bible in 1 year with Nicky Gumbel, and the strapline for that day was "Your story has power," and it was about the power of testimony. And there and then I thought, well, yes, I will have to write my full testimony in a book. And I want to try and make it so that I'm not aiming it at a Christian audience. I'm aiming it at people who are interested, for instance, in policing. And I want to get across to them that at the heart of my life has been Jesus, informing what I do. So when it came to lockdown, I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. So I wrote my story. It's about 260 pages of book print. It's in the editing stage at the moment. And I mean, I wrote it because I felt I needed to do it. And if it was only just for the grandchildren, it'd be worthwhile. But then I found an advert for this company advertising for new authors, and you could make an online application. So I did the synopsis, I sent my full manuscript, I said a little prayer over it, but I wouldn't have great expectations. And they wrote back.
That's a great name. That's a great name for a title straight away.
I wish I'd have thought of that. I think somebody
thought of that one. Yeah.
Anyway, the long story cut short is that I have a contract, and we are now going through the process of getting it ready for publication. Sometime, certainly within the next 12 months, but I don't know quite when. But you'll hear about it when it happens. But
John, with these stories. And I love your passion for life. I think one of the things that always, when I find, and this is one of my bugbears in life with the church and with everything else. There's very often a complete lack of imagination. It's creative imagination.
Yeah.
How do you do things differently? How do you go from here to here? How can you make a difference? Because you're that creative, and I see that in you. I've seen it from the beginning when we just spoke on the phone, or when you joined the community. And when I met you, you're again a box of tricks. If you can't find a way to do it, you'll do something else. Would that be accurate description of you?
Yeah, I've done a lot of new things. I tested my book out on a guy at our church who's not got a Christian background, and I'd just done the manuscript and put it in a folder. And I said, John, have a read of this. And he read it in 4 days. And he came back, I'm amazed at how many new things you've done in your life, John. Yeah, and that's true. I've always been looking for new things, whether it's been at work or in my Christian life. So I was, for instance, the founding coordinator of Street Pastors in Chesterfield. I ran for a couple of years, funded by the local authority, a 6-week-long holiday club in one of the parks in Chesterfield, getting kids off the street, and it nearly finished me off because we did it 7 days a week for 6 weeks of the holiday.
Oh my goodness!
And we had a morning session for the young kids, an afternoon session for the older kids, and an evening session for the teenagers. Yeah. And we had professional football coaches, all sorts of things, So yeah, I've always looked for new adventures. But as you get older, then it's not that you stop doing things, but you do different things because some of the things that you formerly did, for instance, I had to give up Street Pastors because I could no longer walk around for 4 hours, as well as being
just tell people what's involved in street pastoring, because not everybody knows that one. Was this the Les Isaacs thing?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, Les, who we knew very well.
Les Isaac, bless him, had this vision of sending out volunteers onto the street in the late night entertainment areas with the strapline of to help, care and listen, trained and in uniform, working alongside the police. It was wonderful, really, for me to go back out onto the street on a Saturday night. I sometimes in the church you get more criticism than you get support for the things that you
yes, absolutely.
There was hardly any criticism out on the street. It was all praise. He summed up one night, we were walking out on the street and somebody shouted across to us, you know what you street pastors are, don't you? And I shouted back, no, but you're going to tell us, aren't you? And he said, you're a effing legend. Now, they never said that to me at church.
That's why I love you, John. That's why I love you.
And if they had, they wouldn't have known whether it was a compliment or an insult. But some of them, anyway, bless them.
No,
But so, I mean, the major requirement in the street pastors is to be able to deal with huge volumes of vomit because you're dealing with people who get sick. We picked up this young man in the churchyard. You know, there's the famous Crooked Spire at Chesterfield, and it's got a big area around it. And this guy was sat on a seat, and he'd been vomiting, and he was in a mess. And we cleaned him up. We gave him some water. We talked to him. We brought him round a little bit. We contacted his dear mother, and his dear mother agreed to pick him up at the end of the street. So we've been looking after him for about 3/4 of an hour. And so we were arming him along, and we went past the front of a pub where some blokes had been sat outside watching. And this was about 11:30 at night. And one of them says, "Can you come back for me at about 2 in the morning, mate?"
I love these stories. You also, I mean, the street pastors, that's an extraordinary thing. You another thing you did, which people probably are not aware of, you ran a lot of gospel concerts as well, didn't you, back in the day?
I did indeed. Yeah, for 12 years at Matlock under the name Youth Reach, we ran monthly concerts, and we had all the best, you know, Martin Joseph, and so on. You know, the famous guitar player that you're having on in a few weeks' time. His name's
Bryn Howarth.
That's him. Yeah, and it was a wonderful time.
Graham Kendrick, Paul Field, all these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it was quite amazing because getting the money on the door is always a difficult thing with these things. But when God spoke to me about this organization, I went to about half a dozen people who, they were not wealthy, but they were not desperately short of money. And I said, "I want to do this. Are you willing to serve on a committee with me? Do you think it's a good idea? And furthermore, would you put your hand in the pocket if I need it?" And they all said, "Yes, we think it's wonderful." And so they continued to inform what we did. But generally speaking, we got a third of the money from door receipts, we got a third of the money from individual giving, and we got a third of the money from churches that supported what we were doing. And over the years, I've heard many testimonies that those sessions kept those young people in the faith because they had a sense of celebration with a group of people of similar mind, you know. So it was wonderful. And I love live music anyway, so.
You do, don't you? I saw you went out to a rock and roll gig recently.
Well, that's...
Who did you go and see?
The most recent was Courtney Pine.
Oh, goodness.
That was on the day that the Queen died. And we were on our way to the concert when it came on the radio. And we weren't sure whether the concert would take place or whether it should. And we got there, and a lady came onto the stage and said that they decided, because people had turned up, that they should run the concert. But we stood in silence for the Queen, and Courtney Pine included very appropriate stuff in his programme. For those who don't know, he's one of the best saxophone players in the world. He's amazing, really.
Extraordinary player, actually. And a real kind of, he crosses all bounds.
Yeah,
classical.
He has a spirituality about him as well.
Yeah.
Actually.
Oh, yeah. I always feel, actually, John, that that's part of what your ministry has always been. Take me to the afflicted ones. Take me to the lonely ones that somehow lost their way. And I only hope that the King is close to that, because that's what I thought the Queen was good at doing. You know, doing that. It's an idealistic view, but I just want to talk finally. We've talked about the book. You wanted to talk about the prayer ministry. Now, people who are looking on, who haven't got faith tonight, the prayer ministry, it seems a very odd thing to do. Explain it to somebody who's just come down from Mars, okay, and doesn't know what you're doing. What is that prayer ministry in Chesterfield? What's it all about? What do you do?
Well, myself and a friend, we thought that too often the church is judgmental, and if it's not, it's seen as being judgmental. And we thought that's sad, because God sent his son Jesus to be a blessing and not a curse. And we felt that we needed to take that blessing out onto the street. And we didn't want to do it in a showy sort of a way. We wanted to do it very quietly. The local authority offered us a stall on Chesterfield Market. And we sit there with high visibility vests on saying, ask for prayer question mark. And we sit by a burger van and we have the ministry is sort of, we've worked out now to be twofold in a way, because there are a gang of people who are lonely, who meet there on a regular basis, and then we've got to know, and they've got to know us, and they trust us. And there's a couple of remarkable stories there that I perhaps say. But the more frequent thing is that people come walking past and we engage in conversation. We find a meeting point. They might have a dog, so we ask about the dog. They might be Chesterfield supporters. So I say, what's the Spyrites doing this week? We find some excuse to have a chat. And then we say, would you like us to pray for you? And you know, very few people refuse that, very few people indeed. Now, I think that one of the great things about the Queen's death is that it's bringing out faith in people. And I think it is doing a tremendous impact upon people. But so there's that. At a simple level, on Friday, a lady was walking through and obviously struggling for breath. She'd got oxygen tubes, you know, and so I said, you're not doing so well, dear, are you? And she said, no. I said, well, can I pray that the Lord will put a bit more wind into your sails? And she said, oh, yes, I wish you would. So I prayed that the Lord would put a bit more wind into her sails, you know, and just help her to get up the hill that represents the market for her at that particular point. And some of those we'll never see again. A week or two before that, there was a young lady with a couple of children, and she came up to us and she said, I'm going to court tomorrow and I may lose my children. Would you pray for me, please? You know, that was very moving, and we've never seen her again since. And we just hope and pray that she didn't lose her children. Now, I know there's lots of reasons why parents lose their children, but this lady clearly loved the children, you know, and it would be very, so we get into deep things. But then there's this deeper level of people who we get to know. And the first week we were there, a guy turned and looked at us and said, don't ask for me don't expect me to ask for so-and-so prayer, because I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God. And my mate turned to me and said, well, that's a good start, John, isn't it? This guy, we got to know him, and, you know, we built a trust with him. And he was moving house and he got all sorts of problems. So every time he got a problem, we prayed about it, and we tried to help him in practical ways as well. And then he reached the stage at which, when we arrived, he would say, hey, John, that God of yours has answered one of our prayers again. And so my mate said, if you're not careful, the secular society will throw you out.
Yes.
But then I found I'd been away for a week, and I came back, and my mate said, he's poorly. He's got suspected lung cancer, and he's got to go to Sheffield to the Northern General. He can't get on and off buses. He can't afford a taxi, so he's worried about it. And I said, oh, I'll offer to take him. So when he was aside and the others couldn't hear, I wanted to make it very quiet. And I said, if you like, Ray, I'll take you to Sheffield. And he shouted at the top of his voice, well, what do you think? So-and-so, John's so-and-so offered to take me to hospital. So I ended up taking him to have the scan. I took him to see the consultant. I eventually took him for the operation. I prayed with him before the operation. And he said, well, John, because we had long conversations between here and Sheffield. And he said, I might die, but I know where I'm going if I do. And he then, this was just before Christmas, and he said, after he came out, I'd like to go to your church to thank God for getting rid of the cancer. So he came, and he then came to our house for a meal, and so on. But to cut a long story short, he died during lockdown of a brain hemorrhage. He got nobody in the world, and I ended up giving the eulogy and picking hymns that I knew he loved. And, you know, he's gone to be with the Lord. And currently, I'm helping a guy who's also got cancer. He's one of that same group, and he's been going through difficult times. And so nowadays, he will not let me leave without he takes hold of my hand and we pray right into his situation. And he's going to come to our next Alpha course starting in a couple of weeks' time. I don't know what they'll make of him because he's the most unlikely candidate, but...
Well, those are the candidates. Yeah. Those are the ones.
Yeah.
Take me to the lonely ones who somehow lost their way.
Yeah.
And that's the ministry. I think actually that's the ministry of reconciliation. You know that 2 Corinthians 5 talks about?
Yeah.
It talks about we've been called, be reconciled to each other, and it's the idea of reconciled to each other. And so you're reconciling to God, and you're reconciling people to each other.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, bring the hearts of the children to their parents, bring the hearts of the parents to their, you know, it's that whole thing of John. Look, we've got to finish. It's 9:46. We've not even touched the sides. We've hardly had any stories. But
I'm sorry, I've detracted from your singing, brother.
well, no, you've got to be joking. I think people have been.
Oh, they've been glued, John.
They've been glued.
And a question from Andy Hatvani is, will JB be doing one-man shows like JV?
No, not at all. I'm nothing the entertainer that he is. I mean, he talked that Christmas. He talked for an hour about nothing. And
that's something he does every day.
Yeah, try living with that.
Well, you know that better than anybody else, don't you?
John,
it's been lovely, John.
What a
Thank you
lovely
so much
pleasure
for
to have.
coming on.
And as
Thank
soon
you.
as your book comes out, we will do a big publicity
We
shift
will. Lots
here
of people
on-
want to read it,
Okay.
so you've whetted a lot of appetites.
You've sold a lot anyway.
Yeah.
And I think, is it out before Christmas?
I don't think so. No. They did There was a suggestion the 29th of November, but I think that was just illustrative of the process that they go through. So don't hold your breath.
Well, push them. No, the way to do it, trust me, with publishers, I trust none of them. Push them, right? Record companies, publishers, they're all the same. Yeah, we'll get it out. Yeah. And you have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, because their deadline is not yours. Yeah. But if you do get it out, then we can shift some for you here, all right?
Lovely.
On the community. John, I've got to sing a couple of songs of dedications, then I'm going to go.
Delighted that we'll be seeing you very soon, John.
We'll be seeing you up very soon, and we'll
we're booking tickets. We're booking tickets for your show in Sheffield for friends.
Excellent.
Great.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, big love to Margaret. Margaret, if you're watching, I hope you get better
better.
soon, my love.
All right.
And big love to the family as well. See you soon.
Yeah, the Lord bless you and keep you.
Amen.
Bye.
God bless you, mate.